Welcome, everybody. This is my clinic on the Rapido Fairbanks-Morse H16-44. Before we get started, there is a handout and it is in the chat. You can click on that link in the chat and open the handout. You can choose to print it if you want to have a permanent copy of it, or you can just kind of flip screens and refer back and forth. I'm going to leave this up for a second because if you aren't able to get it out of the chat, you can just retype that short link at the top. There are no numbers in that, and there are no uppercase letters in that. So just so that you know, that's the best short link I could come up with. So the handout that you have is a document that I compiled for the purposes of following along with this clinic, and it takes the production of the H16-44 and puts it in chronological order because it's more useful for my clinic when it's framed in chronological order. So there's going to be two parts. Oops. I'll talk about the prototype in part one, and I'll talk about the model in part two. In part one, I'm going to go through, there's so many changes to each railroad's specific order, all the way through all of the so-called phases, that I'm going to group things into the generalized changes in design. And we will talk about some of the road-specific options or alterations that might have come along. And some of them I'm not sure if they're road-specific or if it's just what Fairbanks-Morse decided to do in that moment during production. By that I mean there are big changes and small changes, and I'll try to point out some of the small changes, but we're not going to get to all of them. I'll take a lot of time to sort of point out what the big changes are. So what we're talking about when we talk about the H16-44, it is a four-axle, 1,600 horsepower road switcher, weighed about 250,000 pounds, 42,000 pound-feet of tractive effort at startup. It was produced from April 1950 to February 1963. It was Fairbanks Morse's most popular locomotive that they produced. It is functionally comparable to a GP7 918 or an Alco RS11. So it's a very similar locomotive. It was in direct competition with those two and a couple others, but mainly those two. And it was, I didn't already say this, it was the most popular locomotive that they produced. We sold the most of them. So this is a good place to start. Production started around this time, just a little bit before this time. This is New Haven number 594. We'll consider this to be the starting point, and we'll spend some time on two photos of this unit in order to get a sense of where the design of this locomotive began. So you'll see that there are a lot of design flourishes. It reflects a lot of Raymond Loewy's design aesthetics. Maybe someone can correct me if I'm pronouncing Loewy's name wrong. So it's a highly stylized locomotive in comparison to some other things that were out there. Maybe the BL2 was a bit more stylized from EMD. So it kind of reflects that immediately that post-war era or the some of the design aesthetics from the 1950s. So I'll start by pointing out some of the design features, and I'll give you another view of the same locomotive. So the very first phase of these things, they had the typical rectangular cab windows, but on either side they had a half circle, so it would look like a capsule kind of shaped cab window. And the radiator section flared out slightly wider than the rest of the car body. And you can see in this shot, you can see with that shadow that the radiator section is somewhat wider. It had this sheet metal flourish around the headlight, sort of a bezel around the headlight or a bezel around the headlight. A really cool looking medallion thing underneath the headlight. Wish I had one of those, but they're probably huge. Here's another view, same engine. Another view of the same engine. You can really clearly see that flared section where the radiator is. And the first number of units for the first few months, several months, they were using AAR trucks. Fairbanks-Morse was on these, and you can get a really good view of that cab window here with the semicircles on either side. There's actually glass, so it's open. You can see through it. The radiator section, if you notice, it goes right from the walkway about 3/4 or 2/3 of the way up. There's a large flat panel above the opening or the louvers or the shutters of I guess they were shutters, yeah, of the radiator section. So we're just going to keep an eye on that because that amounts to an important change during the phases. And there's a couple things happening here. You'll see that this unit, the short hood, is the front. So you'll see at the front, the walkway is much higher than the walkway is at the back. So there's the front section all the way around the cab. The walkway is very high, like a whole step higher, um, or a step and a half, I guess. And there's this raised section in the middle of the long hood that's sort of like a reminiscent of a U-25B. Um, so we're just going to watch some of these features as they change. Here's a New York Central example of a similar engine, a similar era. Built a little bit later, 6 months later than the New Haven engine we were looking at. So you can see the same things happening with the radiator section flared out. It has the semicircular cab windows on either side. Now this is I believe these were set up with as long hood forward. And you'll see that one of those semicircles is actually a rectangle. And the reason for that was that New York Central had a collective agreement stipulation where if there was a seat in a locomotive cab, there had to be a window next to it. And so on this side of the cab, there are two seats. So there had to be a full window, and the crescent window, I guess, didn't um, suffice. So on the other side of the cab, apparently these had a full, or sorry, the two semicircular windows. And you'll see that by this point in 1951, they had switched over to their own design of truck frame. And you'll see also this locomotive still has the high walkway on one end, on the short hood end, and a low walkway on the other end. This one doesn't have that bump reminiscent of U-25B the way the New Haven engine did. So this is what I mean when I say that we're going to be tracking a lot of changes, and it's pretty hard. Kudos to the manufacturer. They didn't do this phase, but even in the phase that they did, props to them for the way that they captured all of the details for each road. This is one of the New York Central engines after it was in Mexico many years later. And this just gives you another view of the interesting cab window arrangement and that headlight bezel. Slightly different headlight on this than the others. Just let me get caught up with my notes here. And then here we have a Long Island version from around the same phase, this was late October 1951. So you'll notice that in the side sill, there's notches along the bottom to make space for the brake cylinders to swivel. And there's also no handrail protecting anybody walking down the walkway. And let's just take note of the class light and number board arrangement. So at what amounts to the front of this locomotive, it has a class light combined with the number board. And then at the other end, the class light and the number boards are separate, and we'll get another shot to look at that. And so here on this southern unit, we can see that arrangement with the class light looking a lot like a steam locomotive or a caboose, class light fixture, and the number board being like a window in the side of the short hood. This one has no notches for the brake cylinders, and this one is only a couple months later than the previous one. So 6 months later, here's Santa Fe units with different number board arrangement again. Very strange looking class light fixture. Same kind of headlight bezel thing that they have going on with that. And again, now they've dispensed with, by this point in 1952, they've dispensed with the um, the notches in the frame by changing the way that the brake cylinders sort of fit on there. Here's a Lackawanna version. Again, you can see the number boards at one end, different from the number boards at the other. The Lackawanna engine is built long hood forward, or the cab is arranged long hood forward. And this is a good shot to illustrate how the MU equipment is different for each railroad. So that's not really anything that we could discuss as a phase difference or anything like that. It's just the railroad's preference. Just take note of the fuel tank, the arrangement of the fuel tank, and the air reservoirs. A lot of that remains kind of unchanged throughout these early phases that we're looking at right now. I'm going to sort of breeze through these, but we do need to kind of look at what these changes are like. So Penzi unit, I don't think the train phone would have been something that Fairbanks-Morse installed. You guys, you Penzi guys, if there's anyone on here, you can correct me on that. But I think that would have been installed by Penzi at a later date. Again, let's look at number boards and class lights. This time the headlight is at the top of that bezel, that sheet metal bezel, as opposed to the bottom. So sometimes they would put it at the top and sometimes they'd put it at the bottom. I really don't know why a railroad would choose one over the other, but it would appear that they had the option to choose. And maybe they had the option to choose like a Mars light up in there too. And then in this picture, this is an interesting shot because we see three phases all in one shot. It's pretty cool. And then this is a different number board arrangement again. We're still in this first locomotive built in 54, early 54, is coming to the end of that first phase, or approximately what we call that first phase. And this number board configuration becomes something that is more consistent. And you can see that the headlight bezel is different now. We still have the flared, we still have the flared radiator section. Milwaukee opted against using handrails on this first order. The 405, if you look back at the second unit, it has handrails on the walkways, and the third unit also has handrails on the walkways. We'll take a second here to look at a couple of other interesting things of note in this photo because all three of these were built, sort of represent the three. I mean, it's not really safe to say that one represents a phase, but the first one was built within what's known as or what's commonly referred to as the first phase. The second one is built within what's commonly referred to as the second phase. The elevated section on the walkway, the second one is the giveaway. It's a lot longer. You can see that there's also changes in the louver patterns. We're not going to get too much into that because there's so much variety in that I'm not going to parse that out just yet. And then the last engine is from the phase that Rapido has done, and that's with the high walkway all the way around the engine, but we'll get to that in a minute. And that's what that's illustrating. Those three arrows are sort of pointing to the three different configurations of the walkway along the long hood. So again, this is a really challenging model to represent well. If you just, if a model manufacturer were, for instance, to come up with one set of tooling and then put a bunch of different road names on it, I would hazard to guess they're wrong for all of them or maybe they're right for one of them and then wrong for all the rest. If you're just going to use tooling for one. We're into late 54 or middle to late 54 here. And there's a significant change happening here, and that is that the radiator fans on the roof, they change the configuration of the fans to angle them at 30 degrees. And so that means that that screen that wraps around the roof and onto the sides, it now occupies some of that space that I pointed out earlier is like a big flat space on the top quarter or top third. So this is a significant change as well. And then we've left behind the fancy headlight thing by mid to late 1954. N&W has done a really interesting thing in that the walkway at the end is elevated. So we talked about that earlier, where the short hood end walkway is tall and the long hood end walkway was low. And I guess, well, this was actually a Virginian unit. So a Virginian probably specified something to the effect of like they wanted to be able to MU these either end to end. So there was this elevated platform in the middle of the walkway there. Around this time, we start seeing the circular latches on the doors on the sides. We still have the different walkway heights. But at this point, we start to see this pocket for the door, the cab door. And you'll notice we talked about number boards and class lights. So now we have something that resembles more of a streamlined, diesel locomotive class light. And that's going to stay on all future phases. So here's another, this is pointing out the raised walkway so that the locomotives would be at the same height for walking between them. I don't really have anything in particular to point out in this shot other than the fact that I love the paint scheme. I think it's brilliant. And then now we're stepping into the phase of locomotives that Rapido has produced in their model. So we'll call it the phase three. I think that's what everybody tends to call it. The walkway is the same height all the way around the engine now, which is, as Craig just pointed out, it's the same as the big Trainmaster, the big six-axle Trainmaster thing that they built. Which also means that they have tall step wells or ladders at each corner now, instead of the long hood end had a shorter ladder or step well, whatever you want to call it. And now we start to see louvers on the side to ventilate the various compartments that are in there, things like battery boxes and that sort of thing to help ventilate them to prevent explosions. And we also have DeFasco trucks on the castings on the CLC units. So CLC is Canadian Locomotive Company, I guess it was, in Kingston, Ontario. And they were building locomotives under license for Fairbanks-Morse. And you can see the builder's plate, a little bit different from an FM builder's plate there. So this is another difference among millions of differences. I'm exaggerating, but among many, many differences. Obviously, CN has got their own style of bell on this. That's not a Fairbanks-Morse or CLC modification. That's their own specification for that. Fuel tank's a bit different. Air reservoir is a bit different from earlier phases. This is a great shot, or a nicely exposed shot. I like this one because you can see how we can talk about the radiator fans. There were three fans, even though there was space for four. They put three fans in, and on CP for some reason they blanked out the section where there was no fan. On other roads, they just left it as a screen. And I would imagine that had to do with winterizing that space, perhaps, so that it wasn't a spot where you could collect a giant chunk of ice or something in the wintertime. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm just that's conjecture. There's some notches in the side sill now that account for the water fill for the water tanks. This is a boiler equipped engine. And this is an interesting configuration that they came up with, and that is that the water tanks kind of straddle around the fuel tank, which is in the center. And we've gone to vertical shutters on the radiator section, this is a nice photo to point that out. So we had horizontal shutters previously when the shutter section was much taller because the walkway was shorter, right? So now we've got these vertical shutters. Here's a very cool builder's photo. This is a dynamic brake equipped locomotive, and you can tell because if I'm not mistaken, it's that screen The long hood is the front on this locomotive, so it would be the screen just ahead of the cab. And the fan would be directly above that, so I would imagine the resistors are probably vertically mounted behind that screen. This is a non-dynamic equipped locomotive. Another builder's photo. Smaller fuel tank. This is the Fairbanks-Morse. Obviously, this is the Fairbanks-Morse trucks that they were using right from their partway through the first year of production. They switched over to their own trucks from AAR trucks. Interesting louver arrangements on these, all very different from road to road. Well, not very different, but and there's enough difference that you know you'd have to kind of go with your specific photos to model your prototype. This one's of particular interest to me because this is the model that I have, except it's in Penn Central paint. I guess that's a cab heater box in front of the cab there under the whistle air horn thing. This is a steam generator equipped locomotive. So there's a steam generator in the short hood. There's not a whole lot to indicate that when you look down on the model from above, but I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And water tanks for the boiler. Another builder's photo of that. Oh, here's something I really love about this. You can see daylight under the frame, between the frame and the fuel tank. So make a mental note of that. Cool thing about the New Haven engines is that they had a light on the stanchion next to the opening for the drop step. That's kind of neat. I forget why I put that arrow there, so we're just going to keep moving. Another good shot of the New Haven engine because you get a really clear view of the pilot on this one. Drop step is low on these. I think we'll look at another shot of the CN engine. If I'm not mistaken, the CN engine has a high drop step, meaning that you don't have to jump down from the platform to get onto the step between the locomotives. And there's a chain. It's interesting. There's a chain across that the gap where there is no gap, I guess that's the point. There's no gap in the handrail. So I guess you have to duck under the handrail or that bar comes out. I'm not sure which. Probably have to duck under it. And then the chain, I guess, would go across to the next unit to provide some sort of handhold, I suppose, for moving between locomotives if you needed to do that while they were moving. Here's a gorgeous repaint. Looks pretty fresh. This is shot in Chicago after the locomotives were collected there by Penn Central in order to be in one maintenance space. Craig Zaney and I had an interesting conversation about and I don't know the answer yet, but judging by this photo, I think I might have an idea. So we were talking about the steam line because these New Haven locomotives were for passenger use. They had a boiler in them. And it would appear that I'm not sure if Penn Central took the steam line out or not. They were used for switching passenger trains, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know if they would want to hook up the boiler to passenger cars as they're switching them. But that's something for us to figure out at some point. I think the walkway height on these locomotives, this is one of the things that I mean I've always thought this phase of these four axle Fairbanks-Morse units were just so cool because the high walkway makes them look brutish, but yet they're short, like not like the big train masters. They're short, kind of stubby looking, really, really stocky looking engines. This is a nicely exposed photo for getting a sense of the shape of the model that Rapido has depicted with theirs. And we can point out a couple things that we've been watching, right? Class lights, that's kind of the standard class light configuration now. Number boards, we're into that standard number board configuration. Here's CP unit. Again, this one's built by CLC in Kingston. Different look to the fuel tank, or sorry, to the tank. This is a boiler-equipped engine as well. So they've done something different with their water tank than the New Haven did. Builder's photo of the B&O prototype dynamic brake equipped. High mounted drop step, right? Small fuel tank, very small fuel tank in comparison. Same group of engines, but this one is just renumbered later on. So it's a newer photo. This photo's a bit wonky because of the way it's cropped off, but you can get a good shot, a good view of the DeFasco trucks, DeFasco truck castings. CP had several orders of these over time. So they showed up in a couple of or three different number ranges. In comparison to CN, their bell is typically or more typically mounted under the frame rather than the CN bell, which is up on top of the short hood, or was it the long hood? I forget if they're long hood forward now. So the CP units were short hood forward. Again, you can see the CLC builder's plate at the far end in this shot. There's no drop step at all on this one. There is MU equipment, but I suppose they did not anticipate people moving between them. And because there's no drop step, there's no gap in the railing. Likewise, we're going to skip ahead now to 1960. So by this point in time, Fairbanks-Morse was not producing locomotives or these locomotives for sale to US or Canadian roads. So they'll produce a few in 60 and 62 and 63, I think. My handout will have that information on it. But they're only for export to Mexico. The Mexican roads had very colorful schemes back then. This one is, I mean, this kind of blows my mind. 4-unit lash up of these things. That's pretty awesome. I just put this photo in because I thought it was fantastic. You know, a 4-unit lash up of these brutish looking engines. I've never met anybody who models this era of Mexican railroading. And this was built in January of 63. So only 2 more units would be built after this one. So in the following month after, so in February of 63, they built 2 more and then they stopped production. And then I've got a couple of interesting shots. So this thing has a EMD prime mover in it. I think this is, maybe someone can help me out. I think this is an H15-44. I don't think this is an H6.
Correct.
Yeah. And it's been remotored or repowered by I forget who did it. It might have been EMD. They might have sent it to
Yeah,
EMD.
those went back to EMD.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how cool is that? That's pretty fantastic. And then this thing, come on now, chop nosing one of those things. It doesn't look terrible. I don't know. I've seen worse. Line's done some pretty obnoxious things to locomotives, so this isn't. So let's get into this. So broad strokes, my overall impression, the parts are all in the right place and proportionally accurate based on all the photos. I don't have drawings. I really love the way the contours and the curved surfaces are done on this model. And I've taken a lot of time to make sure that the light was such that you can see all of the really nicely contoured surfaces because I think they did a fantastic job on that. important things like all of the dimensional, the proportions between window openings and fuel tank and truck size, axle spacing, all of that matches up with photos, even when I lay them over top of, lay photos over top of photos of the model. Frame height is convincing. The model is just superbly proportioned. I'm also a huge fan of this prototype, and I was ecstatic when I started seeing the pre-production models at some of the RPMs that Dan Darnell had on the table. So let's get into some detail shots. Like, I want you to keep in mind while you're looking at these photos that you, with your naked eye, will never actually look at your models this close because these are really, really close photos. So this is the long hood end, obviously. The grills over the fan. I quite like the way they've done this. The fan detail underneath. As a person who likes to weather, I guess one of the things that I was hoping is that I could pull the fans out from underneath and weather them differently. I mean, that's a pretty minor I mean, I think that's a bit of an extreme expectation out of a manufacturer. It's just a wish that and I haven't actually pulled it apart yet to see if I can do that. Certainly not or a deal breaker. The shutters are depicted closed. The handrails, I can report, are really nicely rendered on this model. They're straight. The thickness is appropriate for everything, including the stanchions. I really love the tube fittings and the bracket bases. Just really, really nicely done, the door handles. This is the other end of the long hood. So this is the DB fan on the roof, the grill opening on the side. This is another view of the stanchions from above, right? And your air whistle, your New Haven air whistle. I like the way that the boxes for the louvers are, because there's a lot of variation with these boxes, the louver boxes that are high up on the locomotive's long hood. There's variation between prototypes, and I love the way that they were rendered on the model. Number boards are just really nicely done. I love this the way that they're printed on the back of the glazing. The number boards, of course, they light up separately. The headlights, the headlight has a dim function and a bright function, and the class lights can be toggled between off, white, green, and red, I believe. And there's an even closer look. Like I said, far closer than you're ever going to get to your model. Really nicely rendered and specifically done handbrake equipment, MU equipment. There's the little light on the stanchion next to the drop step. It does not light up. That would be an incredible accomplishment if it did. But I'm not complaining about that because I don't even see how that's kind of technologically possible. I haven't tried, but I just realized that I'm wondering if the drop step actually drops. I haven't tried to pull it down. I wonder if it hinges. And it only just occurred to me now looking at this photo. So there's the straight on front view. Nice detail behind the lens of the headlight on this version, on the Penn Central version. I only have the Penn Central version, but I'm going to guess that if the headlight was different on a different railroad's unit, that Rapido probably depicted it differently.
They did.
There you go. The interior is pretty fantastic, I have to say. It's tough to do interiors on models because you have to put the floor high, right? Higher than it would be prototypically. But all the stuff inside is at the right height, even though the floor is probably, I'm guessing, just a tiny bit higher than it's supposed to be, right? So you've got a little throttle stand in there. You've got control stand inside there. I tried to take a shot right in through the window. I mean, they've even got the back wall in there. Come on, right?
And the instruments light up on that thing
And the
too.
and the instruments light up. Like it's I'm laughing because I'm so amused by, how much how at the lengths to which they went on this model to get all of these things included. I mean, if I wanted to have a beef, it's that red wire, but I mean, a little bit of paint, I'm gonna get rid of that when I weather it. I'll show you an underside view in a couple of frames. So you get to see, I think, something that contributes to the effect um, of the way that the truck side frames are really nicely done. And in this, I love this. Check it out. You can see under the fuel tank, right? So they've got that opening just like on the prototype. All the louvered surfaces and everything. I took a lot of time with the light on this to make sure I captured all of the surfaces with the louvers and the tread plate on the steps, the door handles, quite nicely done. The screen, what's implied, it's not an actual opening, it's implied in the tooling, the screen on the long hood door, the engine room door there. It's at the very, very far left of this frame. It's really nicely done. The artwork is great. The artwork is accurate and correct. The Penn Central Historical Society is appreciative of the fact that everything is the way it should. Everything is proportioned correctly. Really nice, fine screen printing or sorry, pad printing, not screen printing for all of this small lettering. Very crisp. Even got a little builder's plate printed on there. All of the small parts are proportioned appropriately. So like even that emergency fuel cutoff is the size that it appears to be in the photos anyway. Crazy, crazy close up, but it does give you a sense of, like it's almost legible into that builder's plate and nicely rendered Penn Central logo. Thanks very much, guys. A little bit of detail underneath the frame, the conduit there, and some plumbing. All nicely done, sand pipes and everything. The bracket across between the side frames. And if you look at the thickness of the side frame, that's nice too. That's something that's been a long time coming with a lot of our HO models. The side frames are kind of unrealistically thick, right? So this is nicely done, I think anyway. Um, Here's the steam line. Little bugaboo. The screw to take the coupler out is right under that steam line part. So I guess that means that I'm going to have to take that part out to get the coupler out in order to get inside the locomotive if I want to see if I can get that fan piece out of there. Or alternatively, I won't bother weathering that piece that has the fans on it. I'm not sure how much of a difference it'll make, right? I don't have a video for you, but I can report that the sound is really good. I would say probably the best that I've heard yet from a manufacturer. I have the feeling the speaker is not your typical kind of sugar cube speaker. It sounds really good. This is a full version, Loc Sound version 5 decoder. I talked to you about class lights. It has ground lights, functional ground lights as well, and a cab interior light. I'm just trying to get caught up on things that I might have missed. Far more sound effects than I personally would ever use. There's a lot of sound effects, but I mean that goes with, the Loc Sound decoder has a ton of stuff in it. And then here again, you can see the daylight under between the frame and the water tank slash fuel tank assembly and all that. Just a quick shot of what it looked like when I opened the box. Of course, you get stickers. Who doesn't love stickers? It's your typical clamshell packaging, right? And I think that's kind of industry standard now. The clamshell locomotive is cradled in there real nice, lots of foam around it. The manual is 24 pages if you include the front and back cover. It looks like, it's made to look like a Fairbanks-Morse product manual. The content is your standard fare for Rapido. It's written with that kind of lighthearted, almost irreverent voice. The locomotive weighs 417 grams or 14.7 ounces. And just for comparison, Rapido's RS11 weighs 400 grams, so 17 grams lighter, 14.1 ounces. Just this afternoon, I ran a 25 car train up a 2% grade and the loco with, and that there's like the train is always inside of two curves at least. And it had no trouble. Like it's a real strong puller. It's a really nice runner as well. So overall, my impressions is that this, I think, of all of the Rapido products I own, and of all of the Rapido products I've had an opportunity to take a close look at, this, I think this is their high. This is a benchmark product for them. It's the best thing I've seen them produce. It's spectacular, fantastic model. So happy that, and I've always been a big fan of this model, even though of this particular locomotive, even though I can't really use it on my layout because the Penn Central engines were permanently assigned to Chicago almost right away after the merger to, like I said, to switch the passenger terminal there. And but it doesn't, I'm tempted to go out and buy the Milwaukee engine too. That's how much I like it, even though I can't use that either.